Hello everybody and welcome back to a brand new video. Today we are going back into the Prime Minister timeline, episode 10, as we take a look at the years of 1977 through 1997, 2 decades as per normal. Let's jump straight into it. Heading off to 1977, the United States lifts its ban on travel by U.S. citizens to places like Cambodia, Cuba, North Korea, and Vietnam, and Prime Minister McGovern establishes the Ministry of Energy. I believe they're called ministries. I'm basing them off of Canada, so they're not like departments, like ministries. Someone correct me down in the comments if I'm wrong, but he establishes the Ministry of Energy, or whatever it's called. Heading off to 1978, Prime Minister McGovern calls for a state of emergency. This is like a first time ever thing for something for this reason, due to a city known as Love Canal being built over a toxic waste dump, kind of just, the whole climate thing for progressives. This would be a big deal to them. Of course, the Camp David Accords would be signed under McGovern as well. Similar to Carter, they might get a little more, attention than they did in our timeline. He also signs the Humphrey Hawkins Full Employment Act. However, it'd be a lot more progressive. Think of like Elizabeth Warren's Job Training Act, like a job for every American or a guaranteed job for every American. This would include job training, government-issued jobs, price control, not communist price control. It'd be like diet communism price control. The only conservative thing, I guess you can call it, would be a balanced budget. However, this would fail tremendously. Similar to the Equal Pay Act of 1960. Yes, 1960. Or 1950. No, it was 1961. 1961. As well as protectionist trade, just throwing that out there. Low unemployment in 1979. The low employment would be like 2%. Which is pretty damn good. Prime Minister McGovern also signs the Civil Rights Act of 1979, which doesn't happen in our timeline, but happens here since the issue of same-sex marriage is starting to kick off. So they would, do the whole same-sex marriage bit, throw conservatives into a hoo-ha. The Iran hostage crisis also begins, and the 90s energy crisis ends here. So we don't got to deal with the energy crisis, though we got a hostage crisis. Ain't that fun? Heading off to 1980, Prime Minister McGovern establishes a grain embargo against the USSR. Carter did this, McGovern would do the same. McGovern would also establish the Ministry of Education. Again, Carter, McGovern, very similar when it comes to certain issues. And then the unemployment rating would take a huge boom, or not a huge boom, but a huge increase as they jumped from 2 to 7%. And McGovern would sign the Staggers Rail Act. It'd be a lot more, pro-union than it was in our timeline, as it would deal with the railroad industry regulation. And we also have the 1980 federal election for the first time in quite a long time. If you look through all of these videos, Republicans haven't had a prime minister in ages. And they finally get one with Ronald Reagan with 220 seats, gaining 54 seats in the process. The progressives being led by Deputy Prime Minister Jimmy Carter. They lose 46 seats, now at 202 seats. And the Federalists under John Anderson, they have 13 seats because they lost 8 seats. A big downward tick for the progressives and the Federalists as the Reagan Revolution has officially taken off. And we head off to 1981 and the Iran hostage crisis ends thanks George Bush. The early 1980s recession begins, and before you say it, Reagan had a good economy during his second term. He had a pretty shaky one in the first one. Kind of makes you wonder how he won re-election. We'll get to that in a second. As well as the Iran-Contra affair. I don't think I need to talk about this. Everyone knows about the Iran-Contra affair. Heading off into 1982, Prime Minister Reagan would announce an oil import tariff against Libya. So they would have to pay more to import, I would assume. Prime Minister Reagan also signs the Tax Equity and Fiscal Responsibility Act. Unlike in our timeline where cuts to spending was made 3-1 as well as a tax increase, cuts to spending would be 5-1, which is huge, by the way, as well as a 10% tax decrease, which that's a lot of tax cuts, I'm just going to say. And the early 1980s recession ends with the high unemployment rating of 10%. Heading off to 1983, there's nothing noteworthy. 1984, the U.S. Bell system is broken up. The Bell system is pretty much just a group of telecommunications corporations together. Sort of a monopoly, I guess you could say, and Reagan broke the bitch up. The U.S. and Vatican also re-established diplomatic relations, the whole Christian conservative bit, that stays. And unemployment drops to 7%. As we head to the 1984 federal election, Republicans under Ronald Reagan gained 16 seats They're now at 236 seats, and the Progressives under Walter Mondale, they lose 16 seats. They're at 186. And the Federalists under Reuben Askew, they're still at 13. Ronald Reagan is reelected prime minister with a majority government. Heading off to 1985, the FDA approves blood tests to test AIDS. That happens here. In 1986, unemployment will continue to drop. It's now at 6%. 1987, it continues to drop even further at 5%. And heading into 1988, we have a few things. Reagan does send $37 million to the Nicaraguan Contras, which if you don't know what that is, I didn't either, but it looked important enough when it caught my eye finally. It was pretty much this right-wing rebellion group. If it popped up today, they would be called far-right, racist, white supremacists, even though none of them were white. You get what I'm trying to say here, but they did have a lot of human rights violations during their whole situation, which, you know what, fair enough, you can call them far-right. And it does look like they did succeed in the process. It just took a long-ass time as they did occupy Nicaragua. Now, what happens after that, I'm not sure. I didn't do too much research on it because I'm focused on the politics of everything, not really the invasions of other countries or the occupations of other countries. That's the best way I'm going to say it, ain't it? But Reagan tried to send $37 million to them in our timeline. However, the Democrats blocked it. But since Reagan has a majority in this timeline, no one's blocking it. So Reagan has that money sent to them, and they probably occupy Nicaragua much faster. The war on drugs begins via Reagan signing legislation giving the death penalty to drug traffickers. That's a fun one. Heading off to the 1988 federal elections, the Republicans now choosing Deputy Prime Minister George Bush as their leader. They lose 2 seats. They're now at 234 seats. And the Progressives under Michael Dukakis, they gained those 2 seats, 188 seats for them. And the Federalists under Lloyd Bentsen, probably one of the longest-serving members of Congress at this point, if I had to guess. I don't know. I haven't been keeping up. They're still at 13 seats, by the way. George Bush is elected prime minister with a majority government. Heading off to 1989, the savings and loans crisis, you know, the whole thing with 5 Republican senators doing bad things with the people's money and causing several individuals to go bankrupt and lose all of their life savings. Yeah, that happens here. Going on to 1990, the U.S. invasion of Panama would still occur. Bush would sign the Americans with Disability Acts, which would probably get progressive backing if we're being honest with ourselves. It would prohibit discrimination against those who have disability. That's pretty much what it is. Progressives would probably back this, depending on what's in the bill. The Gulf War would also begin, and Bush signs tax increases into law, even though he promised not to. Excuse me. And the unemployment rate rises to 6%. Heading off to 1991, the Cold War officially ends. Who won? I guess you can say the U.S. won. I guess you can say the U.S. won. Because the USSR ain't a thing anymore, right? Right? Okay. And as well as the early 1990s recession, that thing still occurs, and the Gulf War ends in this timeline. So 2 wars end under George H.W. Bush. Right? Yeah, 2. So that has to be a good thing. In 1992, the 17th Amendment is ratified in our timeline. It's called the 27th Amendment. It is a congressional pay increase regulation. It pretty much means if Congress gives themselves a pay raise, they can't get it until the new term begins. So let's say if they pass that bitch in January of the new term, they can't have it until 2 years later. I like this amendment. Also, unemployment rises to 7%, and the 1992 federal election also begins where the Republicans end up gaining despite all the bullshit they're going through on the economy. They have 243 seats now, gaining 9, and the Progressives, led by Al Gore, they lose 9 seats, now 179 seats, and the Federalists under Bill Clinton, they have 13 seats. Bill Clinton, if I would imagine, being a freshman or, you know, a newer member of Congress. Because, you know, the Federalists only have 13 seats. Jesus Christ, why won't you die already? Anyway, I hope that doesn't get me censored on YouTube. But George Bush is reelected as Prime Minister with a majority government. Heading off to 1993, Prime Minister Bush signs voter ID law legislation into law. So you now need a voter ID to vote. That is going to help a certain individual win an election soon. You guys aren't going to like who this certain individual is, but it's going to help him tremendously. And Prime Minister Bush signs the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993. This is something that happened IRL, and if I had to guess, it'd be a lot more conservative than it was in our own timeline. because, you know, Bill Clinton was the one who signed it. It was pretty much reestablishing our First Amendment right. That was pretty much it. We probably have a lot more enforcements, like, you know, the whole gay Baker situation that had to be settled by the Supreme Court. Yeah, that'd probably be like, businesses can deny people for religious purposes. Boom. There you go. Also, NAFTA is signed into law. Unemployment drops to 6%, by the way. There you go. Heading off to 1994, unemployment will continue to drop to about 5%. In 1995, a few things. The 18th Amendment is ratified. A balanced budget is passed. Federalists and a few progressives would probably be on board with this, especially if it's anything similar to what McGovern was trying to do with the balanced budget. So it's very much possible a balanced budget would get passed in 95 under this time prime minister timeline. Bush would sign that bitch immediately. He also signs the his broad tax cuts that, you know, Newt Gingrich and company passed, and Bill Clinton said, yeah, I'll sign that. That'll make me look good. Bush will do the same thing. Also, the Oklahoma City bombing. That was sad. Anyway, Bush also signs the Partial Birth Abortion Ban Act. This is something that Gingrich was trying to get passed. It passed the House. I'm pretty sure it passed the Senate as well. And the Senate was Democrat at the time, I believe. And Clinton just said, no, I'm not going to sign that. I'm a veto. Bush would not veto it, however. So there would be a partial birth abortion ban, a third trimester abortion ban in the country in 95. So progressives had a lot of victories, you know, for the past 2-4 decades. And it looks like the Republicans are starting to do that as well. Because I'm going at the same pace as you guys are. I hope you know that. I did not plan ahead on any of this. 1996, the only major thing. See, you guys are looking at it now. I can tell. Stop looking at it until I get done talking. 1996, the federal election. Republicans led by Pat Buchanan. Hey, what did I just say? I know. Republicans keep their majority, even though Pat Buchanan is a god-awful candidate. Not as bad as some people might have you believe, but he's still awful. The Republicans lose 4 seats. Remember that voter ID law I told you earlier? Yeah, you get it. So Buchanan, with the Republicans, end up winning the majority once again, 239 seats, losing 4 in the process. Progressives under Bill Bradley, they gained 3 seats, 182. And the Federalists under Jack Kemp, they gained 1 seat, 14 seats, probably because Buchanan's not a great candidate, and that's why Federalists end up gaining a seat. You're welcome. Pat Buchanan is elected prime minister with the majority government, and holy hell, both major parties are on the ideological fringes. Are we about to go through a pandemic? Because that's what it fucking looks like. In 1997, I know anticlimactic to end it on, but the unemployment drops to 4%, and you know Buchanan's going to take credit for that. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you're wondering why I'm, you know, more jokey and sarcastic than I normally am, I'm recording this at 9:17 p.m. I'm tired. Now you're probably telling me that's a skill issue. I don't care. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. This is the Chaotic One saying, peace.